In today's game, Magnus is playing against a very special opponent. For the very first time that I know of, Magnus and his wife Ella played a public game on chess.com. How do I know it's his wife? Well, her profile says Ella Carlsen, it's got a picture of her with Magnus, and this is a rapid game which Magnus pretty much never plays unless it's part of a tournament, which this is not. So we're going to go ahead and assume that this is in fact his wife. Now I'm not going to tell you what her rating is just yet. I want you to watch some of this game first and see if you can guess. You might just be surprised. Okay, let's get right into it. Magnus is playing white and he kicks off this domestic duel with d4. Ella responds d5, and after knight to c3 and knight to f6, Magnus plays bishop to f4, known as the Jobava-London system. In this opening, white will often go for an early attack of c7 with the move knight to b5, if black allows it, which is why a6 is the move most often played here, preventing it. But Ella goes for e6, which is popular as well, allowing Magnus his knight to b5, threatening knight takes c7 check, forking king and rook. Now by far the most popular defense for black at the master level is knight to a6, but Ella decides to defend with bishop to d6, needlessly giving up the bishop pair to knight takes d6 check, now played by Magnus. And after the pawn recaptures, white is better, but not by as much as you might think. Black does have this nice pawn cluster here, exerting a lot of central influence. Maybe e5 can be arranged at some point. So the engine is evaluating this as about a quarter of a pawn in white's favor. Magnus continues e3. We have castles, knight to f3, knight to c6. Very normal looking stuff. Next is c3, a good flexible solidifying move supporting the center while opening a diagonal for the queen. Ella plays a6, looking for some queenside expansion with b5 coming next. The engine prefers rook to e8, supporting a possible e5. The light squared bishop, of course, cannot be developed for the moment, since bishop to d7 would block the queen's defense of the pawn on d6. Magnus now plays h3, still delaying any further progress towards castling, but giving his dark squared bishop a nice little hole on h2 where it can retreat to in the event that black goes after it with knight to h5. Play continues b5, grabbing some space, allowing the bishop to develop to b7. Magnus plays bishop to e2, ready to castle next. And now we have an interesting move, h6. Now did Ella just play this because she saw Magnus play h3 and figured it must be good? I don't know, but the engine is in full approval, seemingly because this move prevents bishop to g5, which apparently would be good for white in some lines. So Ella is playing remarkably well so far, considering who she's up against, which of course begs the question, is Magnus taking it easy on her? Well, not really. He has been playing top engine moves. Now, are they the kind of dubiously wild and aggressive moves that enabled him to once defeat Bill Gates in only 9 moves? No, but he seems to be playing about how he would against someone at his own rating level, probably trying to make this game as instructive as possible. Magnus now castles, which brings us to the first major inaccuracy of the game, knight to e4. A mistake which could have been avoided by adhering to one of the most elementary of all chess principles, which is, don't move a piece twice in the opening when you still have undeveloped pieces, unless of course there's a really good reason to. Rook to e8 or queen to c7 would have been better, supporting that possible e5, but how do you punish this as white? Pause the video, see if you can spot white's strongest move here. The best move, now played by Magnus, is knight to d2, which is not super obvious, but it creates some nice prospects for white. There's the threat of simply capturing the knight, then pushing d5 to open the d-file, when white's bishop and queen will be converging on the weak d6 pawn. If black adds protection to the knight with f5, well then white can just take the knight anyway, when black will be left with an awful lot of central pawns on light squares, which is not going to make the light squared bishop a happy camper. It'll just be a disgruntled sniper, which in chess, unlike real life, is not a very dangerous one. If black takes on d2, well, that just puts white further ahead in the development of his pieces after queen takes d2. So best for black might just be the move now played by Ella, e5. Stockfish thinks it's the best try, but after bishop to h2, white is still the much better side, despite the fact that Ella has achieved what is traditionally viewed as an ideal pawn center. Only here, it's not very effective since it doesn't have much dynamic potential. The d5 pawn is fixed, and as black you don't ever want to capture on d4 since that would leave you with the doubled isolated pawns. White, on the other hand, has all kinds of options here. He can take on e5 whenever it's most beneficial. The engine is still liking knight takes e4 next. Ella plays a pretty decent move now, knight takes d2, which does give Magnus that lead in development after queen takes d2. As you can see, he's got 3 pieces developed for Ella's 1, but at least black has somewhat clarified the situation in the center. Next is rook to e8. May as well support that static pawn center since it doesn't have any good moves. Playing e4 would of course undermine the light-squared bishop's future, blocking another light-squared diagonal. Magnus turns his attention to the queen side now with a4, threatening to win the b5 pawn. Rook to b8 defends, the pawns are traded. Magnus trades again on e5, enabling him to now target black's d pawn with rook f to d1. Which is not the most accurate move, and sort of puts black back in the game after Ella's response bishop to e6, defending. The engine says that rook f to d1 was a bit of a wasted move and was instead recommending b4, just to squelch all queenside counterplay for black, preventing any b4 or knight to a5, looking to come into c4. But Magnus probably knows that after he increases the pressure now with bishop to f3, hitting d5 a third time, Ella is probably not going to find the best response, which is to just move the queen somewhere like b6, just welcoming bishop takes d5, which can be met with rook b to d8, attacking the bishop with a very uncomfortable pin to the queen. This compels white to play e4, which can be followed by knight to e7, increasing the pressure and pretty much equalizing the position. What was played in the game, though, is about what you'd expect from an 1100 rated player, which Ella is. Although up until this point, she's been playing incredibly well. But now we finally have a blunder with the move e4, which is a double blunder in that it creates a backward pawn on d5 while placing a pawn on a central light square, rendering the light square bishop quite miserable. But even worse than that is that it opens the eyes of the dark squared bishop lurking on h2 to the rook on b8, which Magnus can now capture, winning the exchange after pawn takes bishop on f3 and his bishop goes to g3. But for some reason, Magnus just drops his bishop back to e2. Now, did he completely miss bishop takes b8? Doesn't seem likely, although stranger things have happened. Whatever the case, Ella now gets her rook out of danger with rook to b6. Magnus continues b4, an excellent move, just fixing black's pawn on b5, where it's doing nothing but being a big fat target. Now the most natural way for black to proceed would be to move the queen somewhere, maybe to d7 or f6, but Ella plays sort of a weird looking move now, rook to b7, whose purpose, I can only guess, is to guard against rook to a7 after the c6 knight goes somewhere. Maybe she's planning knight to e7 or something. But Magnus is happy to come into a6 instead, attacking that knight, which Ella now moves to b8, attacking the rook, and maybe thinking that it will have to retreat in the direction from whence it came. However, the astute geometric visualizer will notice an intersection of attacking lines here on d6, allowing the move rook to d6, now played by Magnus, attacking black's queen, defended by the bishop. Ella responds by blocking with her rook, removing defense from the b5 pawn, which now can be captured with bishop takes b5, when black is not winning a piece on d6 due to the threat of bishop takes rook on e8. But Magnus rejects this clean win of a pawn in favor of rook takes bishop on e6, which is also winning, though not nearly as decisively as bishop takes b5. The point to this move is that however black recaptures, white can win back the exchange. If rook takes e6, there's bishop to g4, although the engine is saying taking the pawn on b5 would still be stronger. But after Ella's move, f takes e6, Magnus gets to have both the pawn and the exchange with bishop takes b5. Ella replies rook d to e7, after which the obvious bishop takes e8 is white's strongest move, but Magnus plays c4, which is also quite crushing, attacking the d5 pawn, which is now pinned to the queen. It's not an absolute pin though, which means that Ella may legally play d takes c4, which she now does, dropping 8 pawns worth of material to queen takes d8, rook takes d8, rook takes d8 check, king to f7, and rook takes knight on b8. Needless to say, this game is as good as over. Magnus now has 2 extra pieces, but play continues. We have rook to c7 from Ella, defending her pawn on c4, though inadvertently offering Magnus her last remaining piece, apparently forgetting about that bishop on h2, which can now capture the rook on c7. But Magnus declines this peace offer and instead plays bishop to e8 check. Apparently he wants to have a little fun. After king to e7, he once again spares the rook and plays bishop to g6. Ella, now noticing that her rook is on pre, moves it to c6. Magnus grabs the pawn on e4, attacking the rook again. It goes to a6. We have bishop to e5, hitting the pawn on g7. It's pushed to g5. Magnus pushes his passed b pawn with an attack on the rook, which moves to a5. Next is rook to b7 check, king to d8, and bishop to d6. Magnus is beginning to weave a mating net. Ella pushes her pawn to c3. Might as well go for that queen. Magnus continues bishop to c6, covering the d7 square, and so threatening rook to b8 checkmate. Ella takes notice and responds rook to a8, defending, at which point we get a very humorous sequence of moves as Magnus decides he's going to just allow Ella to get her queen, playing king to h2. And after c2, instead of forcing checkmate in 2 moves with something like rook to g7 followed by rook to g8 checkmate, Magnus plays the ridiculous h4, which accomplishes absolutely nothing. Is he just being a gentleman here, or more like a predator playing with his prey? However you view it, this does allow Ella to now promote her pawn to a queen without getting checkmated on the next move. Although white does still have checkmate by force in 5 moves with rook to f7, Magnus instead plays rook to g7, which is a checkmate in 9, with the engine giving queen takes bishop on c6 as best for black, but instead we have queen to a1, giving Magnus checkmate in 1 with rook to g8, which he does not play, opting instead for rook to d7 check. Best for black now is king to c8, but Ella decides to put her king on e8, allowing Magnus to give her a valuable lesson in the destructive power of the tactic known as the discovered check with rook to a7 check. King to d8 is black's only legal reply, after which rook takes a8 would force black to give up the queen with queen takes a8, as it's the only legal move, but Magnus goes for a quicker checkmate with rook to f7, threatening rook to f8 checkmate, which black can best delay by sacrificing the queen or by playing queen to h8, after which white has checkmate in 4, beginning with the move b6, but Ella now plays queen to d1, again allowing Magnus checkmate in 1, which this time he does execute with rook to f8 checkmate. So, very interesting to see Magnus having some fun, while giving his wife Ella some good instruction and experience playing against an opponent that will not let her mistakes go unpunished, or at least not most of them. It's always good to play against an opponent that can absolutely destroy you every now and then. That way when you go back to playing someone at your own level, it just seems that much easier. At least that's my experience. But that's it for now. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you enjoyed this content. Like the video if you liked it. Feel free to leave a comment. Those things always help the channel grow, and I will see you soon.